Over the last few years, I've spent a lot of time studying the roles that children play in their immigrant families. How do children, who are usually the most Americanized in their families, help their parents to understand the new communities in which they've settled? I realized after doing a lot of reading that the research had very much ignored or overlooked the roles that children play in their families. But when I spoke to people who had grown up in this country with immigrant parents, whether they were Chinese-speaking, Spanish-speaking, or even Yiddish-speaking from a previous generation of immigrants, helping their parents in these ways was a formative part of their childhood. And I've never read an autobiography or a novel about an immigrant childhood that didn't include playing these sorts of roles. And so I became interested in trying to understand how family communication in immigrant households affects their integration into their communities. Almost all the research that has been done presumes that immigrant parents are acting on their children's outcomes and that they're affecting how their kids grow up, but doesn't consider the possibility that children are also changing or affecting the ways that their parents adapt to their new communities. So the children that I focus on are generally the primary or the only English speakers in their homes, and I've studied this with Central American origin immigrant families in South Los Angeles, in the rural Central Valley of California, and most recently in New Brunswick. What I've found is that there are two main reasons why understanding the roles of children in their immigrant families is so important. The first is that children play such an important role in the integration of their families that we can't fully understand how immigrants settle without taking their children seriously. The second is that children of immigrants are and are continuing to become at a faster and faster rate the largest proportion of children in the United States. Not understanding how these responsibilities at home affect their childhoods, their choices, and their chances gives us a hard time to figure out how to actually help them develop in the ways that are optimal for them and for the country in general. And so let's start by thinking about the first question that I've posed to you today: how children impact their immigrant family settlement in the United States. Because children pick up language more easily than their parents do, and because they spend 5 days a week in an American culture institution, i.e. in the schools, they tend to pick up American language and culture more easily and more quickly than their parents do. And like most other children, they spend more time interacting with new media and technology than their parents do, and so they play roles as brokers of language, of American culture, and of media for their families, helping their families to connect to resources and information that they would otherwise not be able to access without their kids. For example, children will interpret interactions between their parents and neighbors, doctors, teachers, social service providers, and others in the community. They'll help parents to interpret bills and letters that come in the mail. They'll also help parents to connect with information online or to understand a news broadcast that's only been broadcast in English. These are just to name a few of the tasks that kids do. But none of this is to say that children become the authorities in their families. Parents still maintain that role. But what they do is that children bring to the table their understanding of American culture, their knowledge of English, and their knowledge of media devices, and their parents contribute their understanding of what the family needs and their adult understandings of how the world works. Together, the parents and children will develop strategies for what the family needs, where they should go, and who they should trust in the community to make it happen. As important as children's roles in their families are, understanding how these kinds of responsibilities affect children's own development is also important. I found that while children are very, very proud of the roles that they play in their families and generally define themselves by the family roles that they play, this can be a bit of a problem when it comes to their own development. Because whenever there's a choice to be made between an individual gain, like finishing one's homework, and a family gain, taking mom to the doctor, the family gain almost unquestioningly wins out every time. And what this means is that for kids that are struggling in school, it may be more difficult for them to keep up because of all the responsibilities that they have at home. And so I've found, contrary to what some others have, that the kids that are doing well in school tend to be doing well in spite of their brokering responsibilities, not because of them. And because of that, there's some questions to be asked about the trajectories of immigrant kids because they find themselves in a catch-22. Their brokering responsibilities are the very thing that keep them from connecting with school resources to the extent that they might, but it is those school resources that would help them develop in the ways that would help their families most in terms of their brokering skills. All of this suggests potentially divergent pathways for immigrant kids and their families. Wherever I've worked with families, East Coast, West Coast, urban, rural, I've found that children's abilities to balance their educational and their family responsibilities tend to compound over time. Once children have found a teacher, a doctor, or a responsible adult of any kind who can help them when they need it, they tend to be able to do that again and again, and so they know how to reach out, and that brings them success, and one success leads to future successes. The children who are most likely to advocate for their families in this way are also those that are most likely to be doing well in school and those who are most likely to have fuller bilingual capacities. Not surprisingly, these are also the children who have parents who have modeled proactive behaviors for them in the past. And so these families, parents and children together, take these sorts of proactive communication behaviors and as a result end up with more rich information from doctors, from teachers, from other service providers in the community, and therefore have more information at their disposal to have conversations and make better decisions about where to go and who to trust in their community. Unfortunately, the converse is also true. Families that depend on children who are limited bilinguals and who are struggling in school also tend to be the parents who are the least proactive about getting these sorts of information. And so these families as a whole end up with less information from which to make decisions, which we see expressed in the kinds of social disparities that these families face in terms of health care, of schooling, and social services. And so what this means is that understanding children's brokering has to be regarded as complex, because if we celebrate kids' successes too much, we risk glossing over the kinds of disparities that their families face and the structural constraints that they have. But if we focus just on those structural constraints, we risk missing the very innovative and real strategies that families create together to overcome these sorts of constraints and to make real connections to their communities.